So I'm here today with Christina Coe, and we're talking about what it's like to interact with policymakers, and specifically about her role as a government relations person here for the University of Michigan. So I'd like to talk a little bit for just a minute about narrative. You mentioned that storytelling was an incredibly effective way to capture and maintain a policymaker's attention. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? What kinds of stories are compelling for policymakers, and how are they structured?
So I think that ultimately the research is the story itself.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go in and we talk to a legislator or their staff about an issue or something that we're working on, the research ultimately is the story.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of lucky in that sense that our issue is our stories are already built in.
Sure.
But the story could take a lot of different forms. And so in one example, the story could be the research and that the faculty is working on, and what are the findings of the research? What are the outcomes coming out of the research? Where's the research leading? Maybe the research is actually turning into another research project, or it's moving forward. But the story could also be, maybe we're talking about the importance of interdisciplinary research, in which case we would use an example of the interdisciplinary research that's being done on campus.
Sure.
And the University of Michigan is great at the interdisciplinary research, and so we'll draw from something that's happening on campus and tell a story that way. But I think that there's a lot of different ways you can bring storytelling into it, and I think that one of the ways that I think the community talks a lot about research is tying in the importance of fundamental research to applied research, and what does that mean? And you don't always know when you're doing the fundamental research where that's going to end up. And it often takes years or decades before you get there. So how do you tell that story? So, one of the most popular examples that is used is the iPhone, and breaking down all of the different research components that's included in the iPhone and bringing it back down to, where did all of that research come from?
Oh, I love that example.
Yeah, so you can use stories in a lot of different ways, but ultimately the research is the story, and being able to tell that story is so impactful and so important.
So what's challenging about creating a story so that it's compelling? So that, for instance, in the example of talking about basic research, when you're trying to make the argument for it and don't understand what the technological or medical or applied impact of that research will be down the road, how do you shape that story so that it's interesting and compelling for someone who doesn't have a scientific background?
I think you make it interesting. And ultimately, I think that research is fascinating. When you talk about, doing the really interesting thing about fundamental research is when they're doing it, they have no idea what, it's going to lead to.
Yeah.
And so it's really fascinating when you think about, the fundamental aspect and, a scientist telling you, like, this is what it was, and then learning what it became, I think is just a compelling, I think it's a compelling story.
So if you can sort of get at that sense of curiosity and get people's interest piqued.
I think the intellectual curiosity is key.
Yeah.
I think is by telling the story and making it interesting, compelling. I think sometimes also being able to walk people through labs, giving them things that they can tangibly see is also really helpful. So I think that the opportunity for staffers to touch, feel, experience the research is actually very critical as well.
Absolutely. So it's giving that sort of personal element to it. So it's a day in life of the scientist, and then connecting it to the broader research goals.
Absolutely.
Is that accurate?
Yes. I mean, I think that being able to see that is very important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much today for sharing your perspective. I'm thrilled that our participants have an opportunity to hear your very interesting and insightful thoughts.